But before we dive in, I do want to make a clear note for those of you maybe new, at least to this workshop. Hopefully, most of you watched the first workshop. I mean, that one was quite comprehensive in regards to the present timeline, present experience we're living in. For those that may be new or anyone else watching this after the fact, maybe the recording, I mean, my teachings really come in a cherry picked fashion in regards to the nature of how I've walked through my own path and pulled from so many different traditions, so many different teachings, and both modern and ancient, both inner and outer, both focusing on the absolute nature of self and the more relative experience, like what we're collectively facing together in this kind of storyline as a whole right now. So with that said, we each have to discern and take everything with a grain of salt, everything that I say, everything that I share, every energy that's present here has to pass through the resonance of your own heart. And there may be things that you do not resonate with. There may be things that you really do. Some things you're questioning or not sure. And this is all really a part of the process. One of the core energies we are really dismantling at this time is the hierarchical version of awakening or enlightenment. Dismantling the traditional ideas of where we've come from when it comes to guruship or masterhood or the teacher who's idolized or these things. And so it's important to note always that we're really all in this together. We may be at different stages on the path. We may hold different energies or frequencies, different codes. And part of the journey we're going into today is to explore a little bit about our cosmic heritage and true history that gives us a perspective that for me on my journey was very much a core question in regards to at least in my traditional path of following Buddhist and Hindu based teachings, yogic tradition, the perspective of enlightenment or the perspective of non-dual realization many times left out the question or the answer of, well, what's beyond enlightenment? What is after enlightenment? What does it actually even mean to be enlightened within an infinite and eternal co-creative universe? Which what we're pointing at there is really the recognition that life is eternal and we are to live within eternity. So the ideas of enlightenment being, or the ideas of after death going back to source and some nothingness void, or all of these things, they constantly were questions that arose in my sphere. And so all of us being on a journey of awakening and realization, we may be pondering these questions. And I was going to make a post today, but I actually removed it because I'm going to put it together in a more collective written article that really focuses on the times in which we're in, which are really redefining what we look at to be awakening and what we look at to be enlightenment, or what does it mean to be enlightened in all of this. Because just sharing a story recently, some fellow teachers of mine, some of you may know them, Ramaji and Ananda, who are in non-dual consciousness or in enlightened energy, which I had learned from for many years to support me in coming into that energy. These are beings in which I had persistently viewed as residing in the energy in which was the truth. And yet at the same time, they're just now getting into many topics regarding conspiracies and more truth-based topics or topics around Earth history and these types of things. So on one level, we can see that many, I've noticed a lot of resistance from spiritual people or those who I even view to be in resting in a non-dual or it traditionally termed enlightened energy, but have very little understanding of traditional topics, very relevant topics in present time, and Earth history topics. And so that's an interesting conversation. And then on the other side, we have topics like QAnon and various other very more mainstreamy conspiracies that very little, if at all, touch on the true process of awakening. It's as if the trendy term woke has now somehow just enveloped anyone who knows anything about a conspiracy, but that's certainly not necessarily having anything to do with what true awakening really means. But yet it can. So we see that, what I'm voicing here, at least in just this initial piece, is that the journey is very, very much nonlinear, as much as it is linear. There can be a linear process on our path as we recognize the simple litmus test is, what is the degree of suffering we're experiencing? It's not necessarily pain, because many of us, as we know, the more we come into the depth of our truth, the more pain inevitably comes sometimes. But with that in mind, the less suffering we're experiencing. And so when we just simply come back to that and come to recognize, well, as a litmus test for our own path and where we're at, what is the degree of suffering we're experienced, even while maybe pain is increasing, or confusion, or potential fears or emotional instability, because now you go on social media and your whole news feed is filled with, like, I don't know, like endless things. So so there's a bunch of things there, but at least I just wanted to open with recognizing that these sessions very much are nonlinear. We're going to be going through many different topics and perspectives, but there's a resting energy that we'll constantly come back to, and we're going to dive into an initial meditation to all connect with that and just rest in our own individual truth, and then connect that with the group, and then see where it takes us. So 1 second, I'm just getting another message, I believe, for a link. I'm not going to get distracted with this anymore, but they want to leave the first few minutes open to that, because people are a little last minute, around here. So I'm going to close Facebook for now, and we'll leave it there. So let's maybe begin just with a space of coming into the heart, coming into ourselves, connecting to our higher self, and just coming into the right space for how we explore the rest of today. So wherever you are, we can maybe close the eyes. You don't have to close the eyes, but sometimes it's nice to do that. And we can bring our attention inwards and just come to rest in silence for a moment. And as we rest in silence, we may naturally observe the movements of sensation, thought, feeling. And for these few moments we're here, we're simply giving ourselves the compassion, the permission, and just really setting the intention of a deepened acceptance of everything that's presently arising. Recognizing where there may be even resistance or pushing away of these thoughts, feelings, sensations, just allowing everything to sink right into the center of being, which you may naturally find that resides right in the center of the chest or just above the chest. Surrendering yourself back to this essence of truth, this sense of knowing. If we need a support with the breath can be used to focus in through the center of the chest towards the back of the spine very slowly, maybe slowing the breath down about half speed. While simultaneously resting in that sense of I amness, that sense of being, that changeless aspect of self, and which is ever presently here, rested in this moment. And see what happens when you connect here. The simple intention of connecting to your higher self, that inner guidance, that inner knowing. This is available here. And we can draw that connection. Many times that can be done through the back of the spine. You may feel a sensation there, or just an inner knowing of that connection to higher inner wisdom. And continuing to return to the changeless aspect of self, welcoming everything that arises and falls, thoughts, feelings, sensations. Nothing is pushed against or resisted. Everything is welcomed back to where it's all come from. And we're simply letting that seep through every cell of the body, even outside and around the body. Feeling the reverberation of your source field. So we can see that no matter what we're experiencing, everything arises and falls back here. And from this space, if we feel a sense of completion, we can return, but we can spend whatever time we need here. I'm also going to open the invitation if anyone wants to share in the comments simply what they're experiencing, maybe their intention for the session today. Maybe there's a certain topic that's circulating or a certain energy that's arising. That'll all be welcomed. There will be time for questions throughout. I mean, I'll address them throughout, but I'll probably get to most of them at the end because I don't know, most of you are probably familiar with human design, but by now most will know that my type is a manifestor type. So I'm just here to lay it on and inform. And it sometimes comes in machine gun fashion, but this is why we have a record button so that we can go back and nonetheless we'll receive whatever we need to receive. But yeah, if there's anything in regards to maybe why you're here, I know I made a recent post yesterday that had a decent amount of interesting conversation around it. So we will get into some of those topics. Not all of them. I realized at the end I said we're going to cover those topics today. I'm like, wait a minute, I should have said some because this is like a half day of a workshop we could do on that. But there was certainly some topics that we are going to cover today, and I have them all kind of listed out in somewhat of a linear form. But like I said, if there's questions or other things that arise, feel free to share it in comments, and we'll get to that. So for those that watched the first workshop was very much grounded in the reality of what's happening, at least in our more collective shared storyline. And we did talk a lot about certain things like COVID and vaccines and agendas and controlling factions on the planet, and really just bringing this all back to how does this relate with our individual journey? How does this relate with where we're at and where we're headed? And one conversation that came up this past week with a friend of mine was in regards to one of the core topics we went into, which was the creation of our own individual reality. What does it mean to create your own reality? I like the term co-create reality because we are in a shared existence in this third dimensional sphere. So as much as creating our reality very much is the truth, the more accurate statement is we are co-creating, because we are co-creating on every dimension with other beings. And at the source, we are co-creating with God source. The creation, the individual expression of our reality and our movements is co-created with God source. So in a dimension like this one, in physicality on our planet Earth, naturally we are much more rooted in the co-creative aspect of creation, because we are among many other individualized expressions of God source. So in this regard, we have to take this into account with how we navigate our experience, and not really get caught up in either side of the fence, where on one end, because of storylines that are passed around through social media and through mass media and what have you, we're naturally going to find ourselves in collective storylines or collective created timelines in which have varying levels of influence on our individual experience. And on the other side, us being an expression of God's source in individuated form, naturally we certainly do collapse and expand worlds simply with our consciousness. Like recently we did a workshop, we went out into nature, and of course we go into nature, and very quickly almost all of the ideas of social media and quarantine and COVID and vaccines and all of that just goes right out the window, because we've just now stepped into an organic web where the elements are right there intimately with you, and it's very difficult to hold to synthetic or man-created ideas that we're not no longer giving fuel to. So this is really where we rest in the middle, and we recognize that we certainly do give power to what we bring attention to. And when it comes to social media and the news feed and all of that, we do have a responsibility to clean up that news feed. I will say that, and really clean up our habits with how we interact with social media, because the majority of the speed of the sharing of thought forms is increasing due to the nature of how much we're spending time on social media, with more people needing to stay at home and like all that kind of stuff. So we can very quickly get ungrounded. And this was the premise behind, our nature retreats here in Ottawa. And it is very much the initial message here, to recognize that the greatest friend and ally we have is not necessarily out in the stars or coming from some ET race or some lofty teacher with all these absolute terms. The greatest friend that we do have at this time is the earth. And the earth is the safe haven, and we'll get into more of the reasons and the mechanics why that is, outside of just the practicalities that we recognize. Every time we go into nature, we feel more relaxed, we feel more at ease, we feel more connected and grounded with ourselves, because we are coming into contact with the closest relationship to ourselves, which is the elements, in a physical body, right? We're not leaving the body, at least not anytime soon. And so our ability to stay grounded within the elements of earth, fire, air, water, and the source of who we are, which is the ether, this is one of the most important practices that we can be involved in this time. And it's kind of like the 51-49 rule, in the sense of like, if we're just spending 51% at least of our time more connected in nature, outside, in the elements as much as possible, away from technology, away from social media, away from the synthetic aspects of our world, this is going to create a world of difference in how we're navigating the unfolding timeline. Because all of the ancient traditions and all the various paths of many different practices, meditation, breath work, fasting, connection to source, connection to nature, all of it, they all are representative of the simplicity of what it means to live as your natural self. And because we were out into this nature retreat this weekend, and at the end of the retreat, over that afternoon, the 6 hours, we basically figured out that all of the things that we would want to do, like in a self-care day within the city, are things that we naturally did within the 6 hours, like, had a nice swim in the lake, sunbathed on the rocks, get a massage from the waterfall, put clay on our body, like exfoliating clay, like you would at a spa. Like eat the berries if there's berries around, a nourishing like meal, like all the things that you would want to do in a self-love day within the middle of a city that you would either pay for or go somewhere for or do all that, are all done within an afternoon in nature. So it was really funny because it's all technically free, you know what I mean? Like it's just it's pretty accessible, and it's all really there. And so when we're faced in a time, because a lot of the questions I've been getting, especially after the first workshop, are very relative. They're relative to what am I going to do if a vaccine mandate is there? What am I going to do if I can't leave my home? If, like in Australia is happening right now. What am I going to do if I don't know, X, Y, and Z happens? And um, these are all valid fears and valid concerns that we may share. But one thing that's important to remind ourselves with is that the simpler we become, which basically means the more in tune and connection with nature we are, on all levels of being, the less that we are dependent on the man-made creations of this world. And so it doesn't mean that we're going back to live like a caveman or woman, or live just completely with no technology or anything. It simply means that the comforts that we've come to know as modern society and technology and all of these things are not dependent for us to feel and be in the fulfillment of our God source and our expression of divine love. This is all already available through earth and through nature already at the fundamental level. So this relationship that is fostered within ourselves, which is very much the practices of fasting or renunciation or minimalism or celibacy or these types of things, which I don't recommend doing 100% of the time, but they are practices that have always been in spiritual traditions, because they are practices to get us in comfort with pain and in recognition that as we pass through the doorways of releasing from our comforts, we're given the true pleasure, which is the pleasure of ourselves and the orgasmic nature that we can have within our own being, not necessarily sex with another or with food or with all of the other pleasures that we've gotten to know through the privileged, modern world. So once again, it's not running to the other side and saying we just need to live, in the forest and create a teepee and all of this. What it's saying is that if we fundamentally have come to this connection and realize this on a direct knowing level, we're going to be less and less confined by any fears in regards to how and what the timeline is going to be within the navigation of these coming years. And the other element that's important with this is staying grounded not only within our natural world, like in the forests and in the natural existence that we all have access to some level, is very much right outside of that is what's going on within our immediate environment, meaning our home, our family unit, our street, our community, our city, our province, our country, because there's a lot of generalized ideas going around, like this is being mandated and this is happening and this is occurring and this is happening there. But when you actually really dive in to the details within where certain things are happening, it's actually infinitely different, like province to province, city by city, place to place. We're all infinitely different in what reality we are subjectively perceiving. And this is reflected within laws and bylaws and mandates and all those things that are arising within our world at this time. So while we can say that, yes, there are specific agendas coming from a top-down hierarchy that have infiltrated and have been infiltrated on this planet for a very long time, it does not mean it's going to be the same everywhere. So we can't just generalize and wrap everything up in the same thing, because this creates so much excess amounts of fear and worry that may not necessarily even be applicable to you in the present moment or present time. And so this is a really important point, because it's very quick that we see an article or see a title of an article and then we think, okay, well, that's everywhere. You know what I mean? Or this is happening everywhere. And this, but this continues to be very head centric, and it continues to pull us away from, again, we can be all in this fear up in the box of our social media computer, and then we get up and go into the forest and we're like, oh, wait a minute. Earth is still here, we're things are still okay, I am still existing, and just like we did at the beginning, we connect with this source. And even if we're not feeling okay, even if there's emotions, even if there's things arising, we're still here. And as we continue to come back to the here-ness of ourselves, this is actually what, like HERE, this is also what opens up our ears to actually hear, and our heart to hear the messages that we're meant to receive from our higher self. And this is the initial practice that I really just wanted to convey, which is what we already kind of just did. I just want to give a little bit more refinement to an ongoing practice that I've used for years, and I've really amped up the communication with this with myself over the past year because of so much of what's occurring. But one of the quickest ways we can come back to a clear sight, especially when things seemingly are erupting around us in any sort of circumstance, is recognizing the direct connection we have to our vertical line, we could call it, or our line into our inner source, our inner Godhead, or our higher self. And that is as simple as setting the clear intention that we would like to receive the message from our higher self, our inner source, to guide us in whatever question or whatever way we're looking to be guided at. Now, this may come in different forms for each of us. It may come in a feeling. It may come in a natural action that you feel you're going to step into. It may come in auditory or a message. It may come even just in an image or kind of a dream, maybe. There's different ways in which that may come, but it's constantly reiterating and coming back to the recognition that at any point in which we're feeling a certain level of distortion, we're feeling clouded, we're feeling like too many things are in our head, or we're feeling confused, or feeling overwhelmed, we're taking a breath, we're taking a moment, and we're coming back to that connection. We're asking, what is of the highest good in this moment? Right? What is of most use in this moment? What is the most practical thing I can do in this moment, or act upon, or become in this moment? This is really a practice that is so simple, but it's the saving grace, especially when we are naturally feeling called to potentially take specific physical actions. Because as much as I said before, we have to be practical with the mandates and stuff. For some of us, many things are very much happening, and it's really happening to all of us in some form. So depending on our free will choice and what we would like to most align with, this is going to require action, obviously, and so firstly, I just want to clear up that there's no spiritual tradition that ever said to not act. The teachings of non-doing has nothing to do with the idea of not doing action, because non-doing is an action. So being in a human body, we're always engaged in action. And that could be sleeping, that could be meditating, that could be running around the street. There's infinite amounts of actions, but action and doing, or doership, is always occurring. The questioning and the pointer of teachings like non-doership or non-doing from Buddhism and these things, we're simply pointing to a recognition of, well, who is the one doing these actions? Is it the you that you think you are, or is it the nature of self, or is it a spontaneous arising? Has this action just occurred, or is it you who has acted upon this? That is more so the question of what those teachings are pointing to. So just remember that when you're getting caught up in the idea of doing versus being, and being versus doing, and all of that, they're one and the same. And the more we recognize that everything we act upon, especially when it's in connection to the expression of our higher will, right, the higher self that's guiding and messaging and moving us in the directions that we feel most called into, this is the highest of action that we can take. And ultimately, it's the manifestation of God's source in physical form. It's the embodied way of awakening, right? So these are some initial practical points that I wanted to touch on regarding to the first workshop, because a lot of the questions I got were in regards to very relative practical elements of timelines and what's to unfold. Firstly, I'm not a fortune teller. Well, I mean, I'd love to say all our fortunes are beautiful and we're going to all have an amazing life, but I'm not here to predict any specific dates or predict any exact things that are going to occur. I feel like we all have a certain feeling as to what may be unfolding and transpiring. And we also have to just take things at face value. You know, if things are going in a certain direction, it seemingly continually is going in a certain direction, then we have to take certain precautions and be prepared to navigate that in a very practical way as well, right? So we'll dive into a little bit more of this in a little bit, but that was this initial practice is such a simple one, but just write it down or just, you know, mark it in. It's probably something most of you are already doing, but it's to be ongoingly reminded, because the more that it's like a muscle, the more connection you're fostering within yourself, and recognize that all the justifications that we think we need to constantly check in with, like that teacher Corey. I keep going to his post. I gotta see what's the news, or, you know, go on the news to see like what's happening, what's happening in the world, or be on social media to be in the know, like what's going on. This is a practical thing and it can be helpful, but remember, when you develop that connection to your higher self and you have that communion, that vertical connection, that communication line open, you will be given the messages that you need. You will receive those messages. You will receive the guidance that you're requiring, and this, more often than not, comes by lessening the voices of all the consumptive patterns we have of listening to an infinite amount of teachers and an infinite amount of news sites and an infinite amount of articles. You know, there's phases that we go through with that, but I would say that we have to be very mindful in how much we're doing at this time, because it's very important that we're in connection with our inner guidance, and that inner voice that it's very gentle. You know, it's very gentle, it's very subtle. So if there's a lot of noise, a lot of activity, it can be difficult to hear that, right? So, you know, this is of course what the practice of meditation is very much for. So so not too much to cover from that last one. You guys can go back and watch. We're going to repeat some specific things, and it's going to tie into some other layers of new resources that I'm going to provide. And I did want to touch on just briefly the Lion's Gate and the magnetic peak. Similar to what I've just mentioned about Earth really being our best friend, the Sirian alignment with the Lion's Gate, in my view, is not actually as big of a deal as the New Age makes it out. Each of us have to come to know what this is and what this isn't. But it kind of reminds me of the mass meditation that happened a few months ago, and everyone was posting the picture about the peak of energy that occurred on the Schumann resonance scale, which I've posted some of those as well. The Schumann resonance and the scale has peaked far greater than even what was on that mass meditation many times in the past few months. It wasn't the mass meditation that caused that. It was just a natural alignment that was occurring, and really sometimes these happen very spontaneously without any real awareness as to where and why they're occurring. So just like with this Lion's Gate, it was it's a key marketing point. I ride the wave of it because I know everyone's going to jump on it, but my messaging is not to point us to that Sirian Lion's Gate, because it really doesn't affect us as much as we think it does, and many times it actually has very little effect in the way in which Earth is positioned at this time. What's a bit of more of importance is the magnetic peak that will be underway between August 12th and August 15th, which we're feeling. And the magnetic peak happens every year. But this magnetic peak, because it's connected to Hitharo, which was the Venus alignment in June, this is completing a very important sequence, and it's basically setting the tone, and it's setting the foundational scale for basically the next 3 years, because the next main alignment will be in 2023. And we could say that the next 2 to 3 years are really where the real splitting and shifting is going to occur on many scales, and it's really going to set likely the stage for many more years to come on where we're going to be and how we're going to be able to navigate it. So I didn't want to get into too much. I just wanted to make this note. I would say one thing to just keep in mind: anytime anything's getting really hyped up in the new age culture, we have to be very wary. We have to be observant. Why is this being hyped up so much? Why is it such a big deal? Because in my experience, most of the things hyped up in the new age are not to be hyped up. They're not really as important as we make them out to be. But that's besides the point. Now, what we're going to get into today to explore a little bit more about So just backtracking to the first workshop we did, and many of the conspiracies and all the different timelines and ideas that are out, the common person that comes and says and sees someone sharing that, there's an agenda to take over the world, and there's these controlling families, and every government and everything is in on it, and all these things. Firstly, that's a very immature way of communicating it, but let's say like that's what's being presented. It's very difficult for someone to believe any of that without having a deeper understanding of not only the intricacies of that, because it's not like every doctor and every scientist and every governmental official is involved in these Illuminati meetings. This is certainly not the case. Um, but at the same time, there are many layers to it that are very much the case, very much happening. But this doesn't just stop at human groups, groups of this world and this race, and going back to Rome or the banks or all of this stuff. In many ways, this is really just the initial layer. This is so much the bottom of the pyramid of what we're really talking about when we come to universal history. And going back to my initial point, which was how, many times those who claim to be spiritual enlightened or start hearing about true earth history type of topics, and they're very resistant, I've noticed, in the community, very resistant to these ideas. But we have to understand what is the definition of spirituality. I mean, I'm sure every teacher will give you a different definition, but at least, and I wouldn't even call this my definition, but the essence, in my view, of what spirituality is, or becoming realized or awakened, is to awaken to our infinite nature and our connection to source, source being infinite, and then ultimately to realize that life is eternal. And so if life is eternal, what that means is that we exist within an eternal timeline and an eternal spectrum of creation. So if creation in our individual sphere is our world, our individual world, and then we have a collective sphere of our planet, our society, well, that collective co-creation is one speck of dust within the infinite spectrum of creation, which ultimately is the creation of potentially many other races, many other timelines, many other dimensions of experience that, again, is infinite in every direction. So if we are coming into an authentic space of awakening, then the understanding of our true earth history is very much an important aspect to that, because it brings the awakening into an embodied aspect of relativity, where we do live in a relative world. We have bodies, and even the highest beings in the universe have, in a sense, bodies. They're just different forms. So it's not like we're going into an endless void anytime soon. Like that's just not that's just a misconception of traditional teachings. And my journey led me to true earth history topics mainly because I was kind of fed up with the mythology of traditional systems like Buddhism and Christianity and Greek teachings, because everything was just mythology. It was like treating me like a child. It's like, why do I have to have all these allegories and myths about potential beings and all that? Instead, I want the truth. I want, who are these beings? What is the true history? Where did we actually come from? And why are the things the way they are in this hellhole that I had perceived at the initial years of my awakening? Why is it like this? This is really what I wanted to hear, and I wasn't necessarily getting that from a lot of the traditional teachings. And so, which is okay, because many times we're not ready for that, but we're here now and we're exploring it. So to start off, I'm certainly not gonna be able to get into all the elements of our history. That would be too much to ask of one person. But we are gonna get into just some key elements that I think are important, and then I'm gonna point you to all the resources that I feel can be relevant to you. One of the books that I've constantly pointed to is the book called Voyagers 2 by Ashaya Dean, or Yesha Dean. She is, I'll explain to who she is, but she's an individual who had basically channeled, more so data streamed. Channeling isn't so much a great practice overall. It can be very damaging to the template. But data streaming, similar to how we connect to our higher self, or guides, this can be quite helpful. So she was able to data stream some very important information, which some of which we're going to go into. That was brought in over a course of about 20, almost 30 years. And this information is, in my view, some of the cream of the crop type of information when it comes to understanding our Earth history and where we've come from and the timelines in which we're, presently carrying. Now, as I mentioned, the history of what we can get into goes back about 950 billion years. So there's a certain document here that I have, or it's a web page, where I'll just briefly share this for everybody. Let's see if I can find it. There we go. So I'll just share my screen. Like I'm just gonna just for our reference, but we're not gonna go into all of it, just so you can kind of get a context. I want to see if I can move this. Where can I move this? Can I move this? Hopefully I can move this. Oh yes, I can. There we go. So this page here is from a fellow seeker in the space of the Keylontic science work, which I'll get into its origins. But she's basically outlined all of the happenings within our history, dating back 950 billion years ago, going into the creation of what we call the Emerald Covenant. The Emerald Covenant is the fulfillment of the Christic way within all time spaces within the universe, and going down from there. So it goes into a very long lineage of history. We see we're still in billions of years here, and then we get into millions of years, and 570 million years ago is when we initially were seated on a place called Tara, which was the higher dimensional version of Earth. And then it goes all the way down into what we're coming into with Atlantean times, Lemurian times, getting into Egyptian times, moving into right here, which is when the initial teachings of Jesus Christ or Joshua Sananda came in, and coming into all the way our current timeline in 2020. As you can see, there's a lot more things, right? So I just wanted to give you some context that the detail of our Earth history is extremely vast, and it's not necessarily important to get into all of it, because you're going to be guided to certain pieces of it. But it is just giving you, it gave me certainly a humbling perspective of my delusions in regards to, what I really had thought was my true history and where I've come from. And of course, this is coming from a system, so any system can have distortions. But we're going to get into that. And so what we're really speaking about when it comes to true Earth history, or the teachings of the original Christ knowledge, or the Law of One. Many of you may be familiar with traditional channelings of the Law of One from the Ra Confederacy. There's other teachers who speak to the Law of One as well. The Law of One, in essence, is the original teachings of the universe, which predates all religious texts, all spiritual traditions on the planet, but is the source by which all of those teachings have come from. Now, the original teachings of the Law of One are defined as what we'd call the Emerald Covenant, or the Freedom Teachings was what's the current the current incarnation of translators, or we call them speakers, the individuals who translate this knowledge. They called it the Freedom Teachings originally. These teachings are coming from an original group of what we call founder races. Founder races are basically what we would say as the first instep from God source. So we have God source as the original spark of creation. And then from God source, there's the movement from God source, which initially is very structured. And that structure opens itself up into various energetic expressions. Those energetic expressions then evolve into beings, which we've come to know as ourselves. But beings exist on many different levels. And those original founder races are the beings in which are responsible for basically the grid, the keeping of the universe, if you will, not in a hierarchical sense, but in a guardianship, in a devotion to the original source. So for each of you in this call, you may find your connection to yourself as a guardian of the planet, or a guardian of truth, guardian of love, one who's here to bring love, bring truth to not only yourself, but the expression within all beings you come across. So the fractal of that within our individual life happens on all dimensions of the universe. There's no place within the universe where this is not the case. And the same principles apply of our ability to uphold the agreement we have with ourselves, that it's like you can't unknow something, right? Like when you've come to know love or compassion, you can't unknow that. It's something that you've now connected with. And so to go against that, you feel that, and you feel the disconnection from yourself. So just like that can happen in an individual incarnation here, this also has occurred in many of the higher dimensions within the universe, where original races or original groups that took what we call the Emerald Covenant. The Emerald Covenant was the original agreement to uphold truth and the original teachings within all spaces of the universe. There was defections from that original agreement. And this occurred for many different reasons, but a core of the dynamic of that was the interbreeding of different races as creation continued to downstep from its original source. So again, this gets into a very complex discussion, and the book Voyages 2 outlines it all in very extreme detail, which is pretty. It takes quite a while to get through it, and again, I don't recommend that you have to, but it's very helpful. But what I'm just outlining here is that the movements of creation from this original source has moved in many different directions, and one of the original directions that was upheld for many, many billions of years with some of the more well-known beings that we've come to know, like beings like going by the name like Metatron, for instance. Metatron is a well-known being in the New Age community, which for almost 600 billion years was a part of this original Emerald Covenant. They were all in agreement to uphold the peace and love within the universe, in a sense, for eternity. But there was a defection from that by Metatron and by other beings. I think it was about 250 billion years ago, where there was, beings, in a sense. Creation moves in many different ways. So sometimes creation defects from itself to learn about itself. So we could look at it in that view, and we can look at the things happening on the planet in that way as well, where, we could ask ourselves, well, how could we allow, children to be harmed? How could we allow, transhumanism to exist, or all the darker things that we're seeing? But on another level, Source expands in all of its ways to, in a sense, learn about itself and learn about all of its ways. However, there are certain points within creation where there's either a point of no return, or there's a place where higher council energies that generally will be of respect to free will, which means they will not get involved to manipulate or control the situation. They will simply observe and hold the space in a protective love as best they can. But there is a time where that has been crossed over and the boundaries has gone too far. And this is somewhat of what we're facing now, where there is involvement that will then occur. And that is very much why the Keylontic teachings, or Keylontic science teachings, Law of One, has come through by many different groups over the course of the past 30 years, because just like many other times in our history, these teachings had to come in to give the information and wisdom to the indigo races, indigo children. You may align with that. Star seeds, many different terms. I don't like to get too much caught up in that, but anyone who's awakened now is going to be in connection to some of those lines of and some of those race lines. These teachings are given to activate those children and those who hold the codes to accrete or hold those frequencies within the planet, so that the earth can basically purge itself. Because as much as we need the earth also needs us in a certain sense, in regards to how it can regenerate itself and basically heal itself from the wounds of the past. And we're going to get into a couple of those wounds now, because this is pretty important to understand in regards to why we're in the situation that we're in, right? So it was around 570 million years ago, where after the original fall of higher elements within the universe, which included Metatron, which included the creation of a universe called, or a time matrix called the Wysadek matrix, which is like a black hole matrix that basically beings like Metatron and other beings in connection to that race line and many races within that universe, they basically disconnected themselves from Source, because they basically wanted to play God. That was in essence the intention. And we find ourselves in our own individual world, when we try and control life too much, we get caught up in our own black holes. So it's the same everywhere. We must not forget this. But that's in essence what was occurring, and that created basically a cutoff time matrix, or a cutoff energy. And that time matrix is still in fall, and it will eventually dissolve into space dust. But the attempts by that Wysadek matrix was basically to infiltrate the other universes within the full collection of source, mainly the time matrix that we exist in. And that was done in many different ways. Again, it gets quite complex, but the core of the way in which that was done was through specific light code and geometry, and using specific stargates within the universe to essentially look to bring our universe into that black hole system. It's a very vampiric way of looking at things. It's the consumptive pattern of the dark energy, or the misaligned way with source, where essentially the Wysadek matrix was using us as a feeding tube, like something to feed on, because we still had life. And it continued to happen for millions and millions of years, upwards all the way to where we're facing now, where if certain things did not occur, our universe would have also fell into that black hole system. But what I really wanted to point out is 570 million years ago was the original seeding of a planet called Tara, which is the fifth dimensional version of Earth. And Tara, which was our original planet, it was our original creation, was where basically a group of beings from all around the different parts of the universe got together and looked to assimilate their genetic code to create what we call like the angelic human race, or the Tyranesium seed 1 race. This was the original angelic human race 575 million years ago, that was basically to uphold a certain placement within the universe. And I'm going to show you guys a diagram here, so you'll just get the picture. I'll show you a picture so you get the picture. How about that? Oh, that's funny. Okay. Hopefully I can see it. Oh yeah. Okay. So this is what we call a Cathara grid. So you may be familiar with this in regards to it being connected to the Tree of Life, but the Tree of Life and the Fibonacci spiral both are defected geometries. They are geometries in which represent the fall, or the fallen aspect of this universe. They are not the organic version of basically the same thing, but in more a more of a geometrical proportionate version. So this Cathara grid, it also exists within our body, because we are this universe. But this is the basically the breakdown of the scalar template, or the energetic template of the universe that we exist in, and all of the aspects within the dimensional field. So we exist currently within Earth in density 1, which includes inner Earth, parallel Earth, and true Earth. So we exist here. And Tara is here. So Tara was our original planet. It was the original space in which we inhabited, which was a downstep from the truest version of our Earth, which is Gaia on the 8th dimensional level. And so the essence of what we're looking at here is basically how energy moves through our universe, and how we inevitably will be able to move through our ascension process, because ascension essentially means our ability to move through dimensional fields to higher and lower versions of ourselves, or higher and lower versions of creation within a specific time matrix. So the understanding of where we're at and where we could potentially go through and in specific routes is actually quite important in understanding. Just like if we wanted to go from here to our closest city, we have to understand the route in which we're going to take. And understanding that route is very individual, actually, but in the dynamic of how we're experiencing it now, there are only specific routes that are going to be available over the course of the next 1,000 years, let's say. So understanding where we've come and what has gone wrong, it can be quite important. So I'm just pointing out this diagram. I'm not going to get into all of it. I just wanted to show you the dynamics of what we're looking at. We have Andromeda here, Sirius B here, Arcturus, the Lyrian Vega system on the other side here, Nibiru, which is the 12th planet, if you will, which is disconnected from or it's very far in our solar system, so we haven't really discovered it yet. This is here. Then we have Gaia, and then we have Lyra, which is in essence where we've come from. But the original disconnection point was the fall of Lyra, which happened a very, very long time ago. And we won't get into that today, but that's a pretty important point in our history. So I'm going to just stop this. Actually, I have one more diagram I'm going to show. Let me just check something here before I get into the storyline of the fall of Terra, because the fall of Terra was the fall from Eden, the garden. The creation stories in Christianity and the Bible relate with the fall of Terra, which basically is the fall from our original angelic makeup that was due to the defection by specific race lines. So I can't find the diagram right now, but it's okay. So when we look at the fall of Tara, which was basically why we're here on Earth, basically what happened when it came to that angelic race, the angelic race that we originally existed as, existed for quite a long time, quite a long period of time, millions of years, right? But in the scale of the full history, it's kind of still like a blink of an eye. But it was millions of years that this angelic race that existed in peace. And that only started to change when specific founder races that were a part of the creation of this race started to defect, or basically wanted other things to occur with this race that the core group didn't want. And so that defection started to basically disconnect the race line, the original race line that we were, from our original coding. This inevitably, I'm very much paraphrasing this, but this inevitably resulted in a cataclysm on Tara, which was cataclysm similar to other things that have happened in the Earth's history, which was basically a fracturing of the core energy that held the template of Tara together. This was foreseen by specific priests and priesthood, priests and priestesses on Tara, that were basically foreseeing this to occur. So before it occurred, they set up very specific protocols in place that were to basically prepare us for the future. And one of those ways was the preparation of creating what we call the sphere of Amenti. So what is a common teaching in Egyptian teachings is about Amenti, or the halls of Amenti, which exist in the inner earth. The halls of Amenti were connected to the pyramids at Giza, which were basically, it was basically a core mystery school where beings would go on the astral plane to learn from higher ascended beings that would give the teachings to then bring upon Earth to support in, further ascension and awakening over the course of our history. So the sphere of Amenti was basically a bridge zone. It was a bridge point that was going to occur when Tara broke down, and when it broke down, it broke into many pieces, but 12 specific pieces, which make up our solar system, because we actually had 12 planets originally. Those 12 pieces basically downstep in the dimensional fields into density 1 and 2, which we're existing in now. The breakdown of those 12 pieces of Tara, one of those is what we call Earth now, and then the rest of them are the other planets in the solar system. One of them was Maldak. Maldak got crushed at a certain point. Another planet got pulled into the sun, and the other planet is Nibiru, which we haven't identified yet through science, but it does circulate around the sun. And this solar system had a bridge zone through the sphere of Amenti, which is basically like a stargate or an energetic portal that beings who are ready to ascend through would be able to ascend through. And this was a very important point, which actually saved the entire angelic human race, because if it wasn't for that, Earth would have fell into a complete disconnection from source, and the original creation of the Tyranesium or angelic human race would have fallen. So that sphere of Amenti eventually was dissolved, and it was basically recreated as the halls of Amenti, which is at the core of inner Earth, which isn't necessarily as important now because things have changed. But when we go into, if we fast forward, millions and millions of years ago into the creation of specific places like in Mu. Mu was where traditional Hawaii is now. That was one of the original advanced civilizations. Also the advanced civilizations of Lemuria and Atlantis, which both did exist. I do have maps of where they were on the planet. But all of these civilizations basically went through the same pattern as what originally happened on Tara, which was another fall. And this was broken down in many different spiritual texts. If you look at all spiritual texts across the planet, there's many different stories and mythology around the Great Flood, for instance. The wars in the skies, like in the Hindu tradition, the wars in the skies is a common storyline by Hindu gods that came on their ships on clouds. These were certain representations of actual wars that were happening on Earth and for Earth for the control of the planet. These were all things that have been depicted in many other traditions, but the Keylontic system just brings it all into much more literal translations. But all of the downstepping across our history at Mu, at Atlantis, and Lemuria, they all kind of ended up in the same way, in different ways. In Mu, there was a complete defection by guardian beings like Tho and other beings there that basically completely defected from their contracts of upholding the Christic way, basically for, again, more power or for further promise by other beings that came. One of those groups of beings specifically was the Anunnaki races. And the Draconian races, those were the original beings that basically came here wanting dominion over the planet and wanting dominion over the genetic codes of the angelic human races. Because the thing is that the importance with the angelic human race is that we hold the keys to infinity, if you will. And so any other race or any other being that interacts with the angelic human naturally is going to get access to those codes. So many times the falls of these specific civilizations and societies were falls due to the almost necessity of these other race lines that needed to interbreed with angelic humans. And many times that did come through the raping of the priestesses in Mu, or the complete destruction of certain races like in Lemuria and Atlantis. Which Atlantis existed for a very long period of time. It had many different falls. The final fall, I think, was in 10,000 or so BC, which was basically the inevitable flood that was depicted in the Bible. And that flood did have an ark. There was a Noah's Ark that did happen, but that ark was to save specific angelic humans and specific animals so that they could basically go into the inner earth for a certain period of time, and then reseed the earth once again, once the planet kind of rebalanced itself. So again, I'm paraphrasing a lot of this because we don't have time to get into all of it today, but I'm giving you just some of the core pieces so that you may feel resonance to dive in deeper to explore, well, what was the real details of what happened with these specific places, and more specifically, which I think is the most important element, is what do these race lines have to do with you, for one, potentially where you have maybe come from, what your race line is connected to, and ultimately, how does this affect the timelines in which we're in now? Because the controlling factions of the Anunnaki and Draconian forces that initially seeded millions of years ago are ultimately the same beings in which have and are controlling and warring for the Earth at this time. There was another group of races and beings that came in that were completely not even related to Anunnaki or Draconian forces, and these were the Zeta Reticulans, which are the traditional alien-looking beings that some have maybe even come in contact with. I know many who have been abducted when they were children, or have been manipulated by them in certain ways. Zetas, in a sense, look at humans like ants or cattle. There's no real emotion whatsoever with them, so it's kind of hard to kind of deal with them in a certain sense. And that's kind of the thing when it comes to many of the other race lines, is that there was many different crossing over of different contracts over the years, where certain Anunnaki, not all Anunnaki beings are negative, not all Draconian beings are negative, not all humanoid beings are positive. It doesn't, nothing is set in stone in a certain way, because just like in human existence, we're not perfect. We make mistakes. We agree to things, and then we don't like it later. We change our mind. this is very much the drama that has occurred for millions of years within the universe, where certain agreements were broken, certain covenants were not upheld, certain teachings were hidden, or completely manipulated, right? Like, we could say that the most recent and the most prominently affecting aspect to this in our current history is the relationship with the Joshua Sananda incarnation, or the Jesus Christ teachings, which have, basically the core teachings among the planet at this time. The story of Jesus is a very complex one in the Keylontic system. But there was an avatar going by the name of Joshua Sananda 12, which was the full Christic avatar that was meant and here to bring forth the translations of the Keylontic science teachings, or the Emerald Covenant, which these teachings are translated through the connection to what we call CDD plates, which are like hard drive disks that are sourced within the core of the universe. These disks are heavily guarded and protected by higher council beings and original founder races. And every time these disks are translated, which have happened in many different places on the planet, many different geographies, Tibet, certain native traditions, Sumeria, Atlantis, Lemuria, Persia, and Celtic traditions. There's many different traditions in which these translations have occurred. But generally, when there's a core cycle where these translations are required, 3 beings will be given 3 what we call speaker contracts. And these speaker contracts are by beings who have generally done it before, for one, and secondly, have been a part of the angelic race line for a very long time. Joshua Sananda was one of these beings, along with Miriam, which was his cousin, who is a Yesha now, and I think it was John the Baptist. So these beings were the main translators of the information in the Joshua times. Now, there was another race line that seeded another Jesus figure, which was a 9-dimensional being called Joshua Sananda 9, or like basically connected to the Anunnaki races. Not necessarily negative. He was here to fulfill a certain purpose. But the real purpose of why they were here, and in essence why we are here, is to uphold basically what we would call, we've already mentioned the Emerald Covenant, but it is the Christos realignment mission. It is the realignment of Earth so that it can ascend back to its original timeline, which was with Tara and Gaia, and give us access to ourselves once again. That's essentially what the core of the mission of Jesus and many of the other beings who have come through over the past many years to realign the Earth, but in this specific time, realign and realign is probably the best term. The halls of Amenti, which I mentioned, were at inner Earth. So the timeline of Jesus, which again is very much, I have a really beautiful link I can send. You guys can read through it all if you feel resonant. Was basically to reestablish the halls of Amenti and give us access to the higher worlds through the halls of Amenti. So much of the timeline and the work of both of the Joshua figures was to move through the workings upon not only Earth, but also the inner Earth through the halls of Amenti to realign their own DNA and then give access to the entire collective for specifically these times, which were, it's all in the Bible, right? Even though the Bible was heavily distorted, all of the teachings, or the majority of the teachings from Joshua 9 and all of the teachings from Joshua 12 were not included in the Bible. But it was stated in the Bible that the times we're living in now were going to be the times of tribulation, or the times of the rapture and all of this. What they weren't aware of was that Jesus had already returned, and he returned in the time when he was born, which was in around the Christ times. Well, it was the Christ times. That was basically the misconception that Joshua Sananda, or the Avatar, would return in the end times, but they didn't understand that he had already come and he had already fulfilled his mission to realign the halls of Amenti, and he inevitably ascended through the halls of Amenti. He did not die on the cross. And that was a really important aspect of our history, because the realignment of that energy is why we're here now, and it's why we're all awakening now. It is one of the core reasons as to why this planet has not gone into a complete fall and a complete disaster. So so that was a really, in a sense, quick run through of some like really key points in our history. If there's any like questions or any other like comments on that, you can get into it. I'm going to get into a next piece in a moment, but we're getting through a lot here, so I understand the the need to take a pause for a moment. But what I really want to just explore now is more importantly, like where we're at right now in our present space, and again how, and it really connected back to the realities of what we're facing. The first part we went into in part one a couple of weeks ago was in regards to transhumanism agendas, in regards to the importance of reconnecting to our Christic self, alignment with our true nature, our true source, and like we started with today, which is the connection to our higher self, our inner communication lines, so that we have access to navigating a time where it likely will continue to get more messy. But what's important is that because of specific things that have happened in our history, specifically what happened with Joshua in the Jesus times, and very much of the work that has occurred now through the Kaylonic Science Shield, which is grouping the community, and many other groups. Not just because you may not have known about Kaylontic work, or you've been affiliated with other groups that may have not been affiliated with this, it doesn't mean they're not aligned with the Christic order or law of one. There may potentially be distortions there, just like there is distortions in Kaylontic work as well. It's everywhere because there's so much distortion around the entirety of this planet, namely because Anunnaki beings basically created what we call a frequency net around our planet. I've been there when I've exited my body, and it's not a nice place. It's basically a frequency net that blocks the ability for souls to exit or souls to enter. And it is why we have gone so much into the dark since the Christ times, because in essence, everything had been cut off. And because the fulfillment of Joshua's mission had been fulfilled, the councils, in a sense, stepped back to allow for life to go as it needed, because they knew that at these times they would be able to do what was required to, in essence, realign the earth in its proper direction. And so the groupings of the Kaylontic system and other Christic groups, which if you're listening to this, there's an affiliation in some form. It's the only way you'd be able to listen to this. The recognition of ourselves as beings here now, and specifically the groups within the Kaylontic community, have been doing the work over the past 20, 30 years, specifically to prepare the grids so that, again, the earth is prepared for its ascension. Because when we go through what we call a stellar activation cycle, which is the ascension or precession of the equinox that happens every 23,000 some odd years, that cycle, if the planet or whatever is not prepared for it, it can go into a really dark place, right? So the grid work that has been done at this present time through the transmission of these teachings was specific to prepare and basically gain back control over specific sites on the planet. That's what grid work is for, because the Earth has specific portals and stargates on the planet that are basically in all the places that a lot of spiritual people kind of gravitate to, like Himalayas, spaces in Tibet, Peru, Costa Rica, Hawaii, Mount Shasta. These are all places in which are key points on the planet, not only chakra points, but stargates and portals that for the majority of our time here have been controlled by other forces. But now, because of the work that's been done over the past 20, 30 years, many of those places have been saved, or at least to a certain point where we're not in a complete fall. Now, there are other things that have occurred that basically did not go as planned. There were certain Anunnaki groups that were in alignment with Emerald Covenant because they understood that if they did not align, they would eventually be dissolved into space dust, pretty much, and their original universe would be destroyed. But this was not agreed upon, and they ended up defecting. And that defection has basically led us to where we're at today. And this can be revealed as you dive maybe potentially more deeply in Kaylonic system or through your own inner awareness. But the planet is under what we call our plan B, which is what we call the failsafe. The failsafe is basically when it's kind of like a mother and their child, you know, you're kind of letting them kind of do their thing, and then you see them kind of getting into mischief, and you let them, but then at a certain point they've gone too far, so you have to step in. So this is essentially what has occurred here, where the failsafe is pretty much a quarantine on this universe and the solar system that really doesn't let much in or out. Specifically in, out is more so an inner process than a journeying, you know, physically. But it's basically giving a doorway for ascension to occur, specifically over the next 900 years. So it's kind of like it's like the safety net, where now beings are going to all have an opportunity for redemption, even the beings of darkness, even the beings who have chosen the dark. Everyone has an opportunity for ascension. Everyone has an opportunity to realign themselves with the original Christic way and with the law of one, the truth of all, the entirety of the universe. All beings are given this opportunity now. However, there are the certain universes in which are completely defected will dissolve. And it kind of gives us a new starting point, if you will. Now, just like in all starting points and all transitions, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be just gravy. And as we're seeing right now, it certainly doesn't seem that way. But the beauty with the failsafe is not that we got to get out of jail free card kind of thing. There's much work to be done. However, there's a certain supportive nature of the higher founder racers and council that have and it's essentially been gifted to this universe, because if this universe fell, that could create a real warp within all of creation, really. It would be extremely messy. So it wasn't going to be allowed for that to occur. But it's not that it could have been better, but certain things could have happened in more interesting ways that did not occur. And that has been reflected in things like in 2012 and even before that, things that people thought were going to occur that didn't. And a lot of people didn't know why, but a lot of what the Kaylonic system has presented in the chronology of order of circumstances and events basically has led us to recognize why things have happened in a certain way, and you know how we're unfolding now. So, you know, it's a big chunk of things. And like I said, it's really just the cream of the crop. I'm speaking about, I'm basically trying to summarize, 20 years of endless translations of many books, because the CDT translations are from a series of 512 books called the Mahabharata texts. This is similar to in the Indian tradition called the Mahabharata texts. They're quite similar. Those texts, for the majority of the time, have been lost on the planet, some of which still exist in certain Tibetan caves and certain other areas in the planet, just like the original teachings of Joshua, which may be uncovered at a certain point. But now, because we had lost so much of that information, the translations occur once again, and they always will occur at any point in any point in history in the traditional language that the majority receive, which is English now. And so those teachings are available. Now, there's a lot of drama that's even within the Keylontic system, which I won't get into too much. But what I will say is there's some specific free techniques and methods that can be practiced that I'll be linking everyone to that aren't my own, that are part of the Keylonic work that you guys can access. And then I have other links and things and resources that I'll be able to present for everyone to explore. The thing that's tricky within any system is that anytime a system gets controlled by a few, then breakoffs of the system occur, and certain warpings. It's happened in the human design community as well, and many other forms. So the one thing that's important with all of this is the thing we started with today, which is trusting in our own inner guidance, right? Where some, a lot, or nothing of what I've just shared with you could be relevant. For me, naturally practicing so much in the traditional Advaita traditions, which is very much about the absolute teachings of the I am nature, extremely simple, extremely direct, and much of what I've taught over the years these are extremely valuable in coming to a connection with our source, so that much of this information may even come to us intuitively, or more practically, we're able to navigate this information with a clear sight and not get lost in it, right? That's what's important, because absolute truths are only as valuable and practical as they apply within the context of any particular situation. So for us to know ourselves as the source of all, as a direct knowing and experience, will be extremely practical in navigating the understanding of, anything, like what grocery store you want to go to today, or like how you want to navigate the next few years, I don't know, or let alone going through billions of years of history and seeing what's relevant for you or not. So it's again, it's resting in the paradox of both simplicity and complexity, because the system of Kaylonic science or other similar traditions, even human design, I do, for the most of you, I've done human design readings, maybe not all of you, but human design is such a valuable tool, but it can take almost a lifetime to understand the full system, as a whole, let alone your own individual makeup and how it expresses itself. So although we are to continuously rest in the simplicity of our connection and direct connection to source, we also have to keep in mind that the universe is also infinitely complex. And so if we navigate both effectively, we're not going to be overwhelmed by the complexity, nor are we going to be naive in any specific contextual situation through some kind of meme statement, like someone coming to you and crying and then you saying everything's an illusion anyway, so don't worry about it. That's a good example of what tends to occur when we get too caught up in any area of the quest. Right? So let's take a quick breather, and if there's any questions or comments or anything that wants to be explored, if this has resonated, anything that's coming up for you. I'm going to get into some other specific details on it, and then we're going to really wrap it around some other timeline things as we move forward. We're kind of in a lull period. August is kind of a bit of a lull, I'll tell you. It's funny. Even though things are happening, it's like it's an interesting, but we're not in a lull at the same time. I don't know. Everything, all of the above is valuable. So yeah, if there's any comments,
I have a question.
Put it in the chat. I'm just taking a quick look at some notes here. Can I give a link to Voyagers 2? Yeah, I'll just send it in the email after. It'll be easier for me to do it that way. But yeah, I have a number of things that everyone will be linked to. I also do want to make a note as well in regards to the human design system. Hopefully everyone has gotten their chart or has explored it to some degree. We are going through until October because just like in astrology with human design, we move through certain transits, and we are in the transit of the channel of the 1222. The 1222 comes from the emotional center to the throat center. And the 1222 is the gate of emoting. It's the gate of expression of emotion. So, some of us may be feeling more or less an intensity of emotion and movements of emotion. And specifically, how do we, express that emotion? How do we move that emotion? How do we express it in a way in which is compassionate, in a way that we can learn to say no in a nice way, let's say? Or how do we express what we're feeling in a way that's empowering rather than victimizing ourselves? This is much of the theme that will be apparent, moving all the way into October with that transit. If you have that full channel, it won't be as maybe noticeable because you probably already have it like a lot. But if you don't have it, then it could create some interesting dynamics there. So that's something to look at in your chart, and just in regards to your individual space. Another comment here. Are you able to elaborate on data streaming versus channeling? Yes, there's actually not too many resources on this. Kaylontic Science System speaks on some of it. It's more in the private conversations I've had with some beings I view to be quite advanced and adept in their process. channeling is very much the opening of your energetic system and body to another being coming into your energetic system or body, versus data streaming or connection to, say, your inner source, a higher version of your template, a higher version of yourself. I'll show you guys a diagram in a second, what that looks like. This is where we can connect to a streaming of information, a streaming of knowledge, wisdom, insight that is coming from ourselves. It's coming from our own template, if you will. Now, at certain points in our history, even just more recent history, the access to beings and certain other councils and guides was safer, let's say. It's not as safe to do so now, mainly because the majority of benevolent beings are not going to be as involved at this time. Not saying they're not involved. They're not going to be as involved because they're not looking to mess with the free will of our choices at this time. They've, in a sense, done the work. Much of the information is here. Now it's up to us to do what we need to do with it. So, when it comes to channeling, you're opening yourself up completely to another being entering your energetic system. Now, at previous times in my life, I did channeling. I did a bunch of psychedelic experiences. I wanted to do the breath work so that I went into some altered state. All of that was really interesting to me. Nowadays, that is the last thing that I want to do. I was telling my friend, I'm like, I'd rather go have a small talk and drink some Coca-Cola with somebody than go and do half of those other things. Because if when you drink, let's say, a glass of alcohol, or you drink a Coca-Cola, or you're doing some small talk or whatever, that may be aggravating. It may not be the most spiritual thing to do. The reality is you're still grounded and conscious in yourself. When you go into experiences where you're either losing consciousness of yourself or you don't have as much control over the consciousness of yourself, this is extremely risky. And any being I view to come to know themselves and move into an adepthood of their own energetic template. What is yours? What is someone else's? What is something that's in resonance? What is not? That's very difficult to do when you're in some DMT trip and you're going like crazy and all this shit's happening and beings are coming and you think it's amazing because we have lived in quite a numb hellhole for quite a while. But the reality is that the ability to discern and have in a sense protection of your energetic field is not as available in those spaces. So that's my logic and rationale behind my decision making in that regard. We each have to make that on our own path. But on my journey and especially at this time, like I mentioned, with the earth being our best friend, to be grounded, to be centered, to move slowly, to move methodically, this is of the highest importance because there is so much manipulation. It is similar to if you go on social media and you see an emotional, title on a meme or something, and then you share it right away, and then a few minutes later, like, wait a minute, I don't know, maybe it's not exactly what I thought it was, and then you do a bit of reading, you're like, oh no, that's not actually what I want, This is the same thing. It's very easy to get caught up in the glamour, even with the Kahlonic science system, we get into the histories and I was like, oh, it's so cool. But we have to stay grounded in how this actually applies to us. And that's why I wanted to only point out some specific things in regards to the fall of this universe, the fall of our planet, the movements of the original teachings of Christ, which was, the predominant teachings on our planet, which many of us have been influenced by in some degree. And there's many other practical elements, believe me, it's far more than what I can speak to here, but this is really what I feel is quite important. So thanks for asking that question, because it's still out there, and I have no judgment. I mean, each person can do what they like. I just know that getting what I've learned, at least on my journey, is getting to know your own energetic template, getting to know yourself in a very honest, a very humbling, honest way. What energies are you actually holding? What is the intentions you really carry? In every possible aspect of our experience, which is an ongoing process, even for myself. This is a very subtle, it's a very gentle, it's a very sensitive process. So we have to be mindful about how much stuff, we're opening ourselves to, getting involved with, practicing, interacting with. relationships, people, places, things, teachings, practices, because to be sensitive, we have to have a bit of clarity, you know, like, and again, that's why I mentioned the social media thing. If we're just scrolling through the news feed and we're seeing endless things, like conscious, woke or not, that's going into your subconscious, that's feeding into your energy. And of course, the more awakened you are, the less you're susceptible to conditioning, but it doesn't mean you're invincible, right? Like much of what I've depicted in the history and what is much more in depth depicted in the Kahlonic system, in the various books, is it basically presents a very humbling perspective that no matter how high you go in the universe, you're not exempt from falling. You know, you're not exempt from a loving and compassionate way. You're not exempt from anything. There's no point where you're just over the rainbow. You know what I mean? There is certainly points where you come to a real level of centeredness and discernment and ease and peace with yourself and the journey, but that's because you're embodying and actively practicing the principles, you know. And I feel everyone here is embodying this in many different forms, but it's really an endless reminder. We're never not going to really require that reminder, you know. So well, never is a strong term, maybe there's a point in that, but yeah. So thanks for that question. If there's any other questions, say so. Just going to wrap up some of the pieces on the Earth history component, just because I feel we're going to close that a little bit and then kind of move on. So I did want to, well, actually this will come next. There was a piece I wanted to read to you. I don't usually read too many things, but at least in these sessions. Let's see if I can find it. Nope, can't find it right now. That's okay. So one last thing in regards to just the nature of the traditional teachings we've come into on the planet is that we're in a time where many things are being reformulated. So when we speak to things like the Christian Bible and stuff like that, you know, in other forms of religion, almost every form of religion has been manipulated by the Anunnaki, Draconian, and Zeta races to specifically dumb us down and keep us in the frequency fence or the box of our lower fields of perception. And that's simply for one main purpose. These beings know the power of the angelic human, and it's the same in what we're facing now with the COVID Trojan horse. It's the recognition that the only way to keep an angelic human from realizing themselves is to keep them distracted or to merge them with technology. Those are the only main ways in which this can occur. And so we've been distracted for a very long time from our original history and the fact that we didn't come from apes. I missed a point in the history, is that when one of the main falls occurred in Tara, the reseeding of Earth was with the Neanderthal, which was where we've come from. But this was just a disconnected genetic line of the angelic human, and it was a manipulated form with the Anunnaki races that eventually was upstepped, as we are not Neanderthals now, but it was upstepped eventually from that. But apes was not ever really in the picture there. And where we're at now is being one who maybe identifies as a starseed or an indigo child or any of that. Many other terms that other kind of groups use, but indigo is, you know, in my opinion, one of the more accurate. That genetic line basically has access to the original angelic human knowing and ability, which is the ability to travel through stargates, through full 15-dimensional ascension, up and down. And how fun would that be, you know, if we could just travel wherever we want and do whatever we want and be free, knowing that we are made in the image of God's source. We have the power to do all of the things that we've seen in the superhero movies and all of that. This is all an available access point with the human. But the place in which we're at now, it's going to take some time for that regenesis to occur, and that is the healing process. That is the awakening. Now, in regards to the manipulation of the teachings, that's pretty obvious for any seeker at this point, but it's just to reiterate that, you know, the majority of those old teachings had aspects to these original truths, but the majority of them have been disconnected, and very key points of it namely the mechanics of our multidimensional anatomy, which I'll share my screen with you so you can just take a look at this diagram I've shared many times before. This is not so much our anatomy, but the aspect of our downstepping from the higher light fields, which is what we call the Trinity, the Holy Trinity. It's not really the Holy Trinity, but it is the original light fields, the primal light fields of the 15-dimensional matrix. These are light fields. They're not matter fields, so they're outside of time. And then we have the 12th dimensional aspect of ourselves. So the incarnation of, say, a fully embodied indigo, or like a Jesus figure, or Joshua Sananda figure, would be an embodiment of the avatar level within incarnation. Now, the key thing of understanding is that the reason why this hasn't occurred for a very long time was because that it wasn't even possible for a fully realized avatar being to exist on the planet, because that would actually destroy the grids on the earth. It was too powerful. So we're at a time now where that is going to be quickly shifting, and that is the opening that we're stepping into. So the understanding of the connection to our higher self is recognizing that we exist on all these density levels, and there's much complexity to this we won't have time to get into today, but it's basically recognizing that a being at an avatar level has 1,728 incarnational cells. So when we speak about the idea of like twin relationships or soul family, or even understanding that you have other incarnations happening potentially simultaneously on Earth or in other places in the universe, is a reality, and your awareness of them is not necessarily an absolute requirement for realization, but it's very much a product of realization, because you're going to continue to connect with these timelines. And this is already happening through dream time. Sometimes you have visions or insights. And this is where you connect to your original conscious race lines. It's where you connect to your original soul family, where you're actually from, where you've come from, where you've incarnated, and where you're going. So the connection to the higher self is basically a simplified version of saying we are connecting upwards to the higher versions of our soul, oversoul, avatar, and rishi level of our 15-dimensional self. And we all have access to this, but some of us have more access, or access now than maybe potentially later, or at certain levels. So the simple practical viewpoint, which we've constantly come back to, is recognizing that our reality that we experience in the third dimensional level is a holographic downstepping, meaning a projection of the higher aspects of ourselves. That's why the same issues that we are facing as a human collective right now are the same issues that have been faced for billions of years within the universe. So it's like we're doing okay. We don't need to get too hard on ourselves. That's an important way to look at it. But everything that is holographically projected into our experience and in our subjective individual reality is to be integrated back into the unity consciousness of our higher self, our true nature. So as it's projected out, it seems as separate, right? Like Illuminati and COVID and good people, bad people, victims, victimizers, seducers, seduced, all of the separate aspects of self. This is all then integrated back within the source of our being through pure integration and true authentic spiritual work, right? And we're going to just dive into a technique in a minute that's going to very directly outline just the simple practice, which we've done many times before, but there's a lot of new people, so I want to explore that. But this is a really beautiful diagram that it's on my website, you guys can go get it, that breaks down, in essence, who we are on the individual level and the universal level. All right, I'm back. So, any other questions before we dive into a meditation together? Let me know, or comments. All right. So speaking on just the topic, those kind of dual aspects that I just outlined, some certain themes, we're going to actually practice just a simple meditation here in where this may be present in our own individual life at this time. Much of the aspect of our disconnection with source is the creation of this dualistic time matrix or time prison in which we've existed in for quite a while. And the nature of dualism or the experience of duality specifically relates with some core programs that we may have come to know, which generally come in the form of our connection and relationship, right? So one of those is the energy of victim victimizer. Victim victimizer is the energy where, well, of course, someone is the victim and someone is the victimizer. Someone is being abused, the other one is the abuser. Someone is being harmed, though someone is the one who is harming. Now, on a practical level, this has to be taken care of in practical means. If someone's abusing you, we look to leave the situation, we look for help, we look to see what we can do to draw boundaries in a very practical way. We're not discrediting any of those elements because we likely have all been a victim to those specific situations. Now, we have also potentially been in situations where we've also been the victimizer. And again, this plays out in even the most subtle of ways. Small little argument with somebody, interaction on social media. I don't know, like someone cuts you off in traffic. It happens endlessly within this experience. So we have to recognize this is not just for the select that we don't play this game. We're all kind of playing with it, but to be aware of it and to integrate the aspects of where this is most prevalent in your experience is what's of the highest importance. Because on the collective sphere right now, we may find ourselves at any level of those stages where we may be in an emotional space one day and we're reading certain articles or we're hearing about what's going to happen. We may feel very much a victim to changes or mandates or I don't know, COVID or whatever, right? And then other times in which we may feel more balanced. And the place in which we're going to feel most balanced is when we've come to integrate those dualities to see that in essence, the victimizer is very much the one who is wounded, and the one who is wounded very much is still very much wounded. It's the wounds are everywhere, and the healing is to be integrated by all beings. So, this plays out in a few different ways, but if we just focus on that simple one, we can come into a simple practice here where you can close your eyes and just bring your attention inwards. And we can begin to feel into just this topic as a whole. Maybe there's a present topic or relationship or something holding place within your consciousness where this theme may be present, even in the most subtle of ways, where there's a giving up of responsibility in identifying oneself as a victim and thus then projecting blame, condemnation, aggression, fear, all of the above, which is all valid experiences, but we can see the nature of this projection upon some victimizer. That could be a group, an individual, a concept, an idea. And we're simply using the space to identify it and then identify potentially where that is presently in our body, if at all. And we don't need to go hunting for this. This can may naturally arise. And what may also naturally arise is the wholeness within all of this, the true loving awareness that brings both of these perspectives into itself. And this is essentially the ongoing practice, is that anything that we perceive that arises, these energies of potential resistance, or even the idolizing of some savior in some sense, someone or something that may save you from something that you feel a victim to. We're balancing these energies by bringing them back whole, dissolving them back within the silence of our own awareness, the silence of our true Refi love. And as we continue to come back to this all-engulfing, loving awareness in silence, where no matter what arises within our consciousness, we're bringing it back, we're allowing it to settle back into ourselves. This may cause a release through the top of the head. We may sink into a feeling of resolution within our being, within our body. And we're simply continuing to rest in this silencing our perception. The intention has already been set, whatever is to be revealed in regards to the resolution of this victim-victimizer program, at least in this moment, can come to a resolution, come to a silence. And you may even feel sinking into like a pink, a very pastel, light-colored pink energy moving from the core of the heart through every cell in the body, just engulfing around you in a protective love bubble. You can breathe that in and breathe that through everywhere in your being, everywhere in your body. And just feel your grounded centeredness with the earth as well. Feeling connected to the living essence of the earth, the living consciousness of the earth. And the compassion that the earth has for you and that you have for it, and sharing in that symbiotic relationship and that intention. And again, you can scan your body and breathe into your body in any area that you feel the body is requiring that intention, that pink loving energy, that resolution. These charges of any program naturally can arise at any point, and just simply setting the intention to reveal them will naturally bring the images, but more importantly, the specific points in the body where that's arising. And as you feel a sense of completion here, we can slowly bring our attention back. Take your time. So if you do feel called to share how that experience was for you in the comments, or any questions, anything that's arisen, please do. It's a very powerful practice, and it's what I've been initiating people individually in, because it can get quite complex in regards to how we navigate this almost laser-like surgery with our awareness within any aspect of our being and our body. Something that's been in my experience developed over the past 6 to 8 years of just ongoing practice of recognizing what could be the most direct method to resolving any energy in our being. So we use the program of victim victimizer because it's one of the core programs within this planet and dimension that has run rampant for a very long time. And it's what sourced the natural desire for the savior, some being to save us or something to save us. That could be the end of the rainbow, or over the meadow type of perspective. Grass is greener on some other side, and endlessly looking for that within everything, but recognizing really at the core this is within ourselves, and everything that we will require is within ourselves. And naturally, within the time we're in, where we are going to face further intensities of holographic representation of our darkness, of the illusion of self, the delusion and the fall from truth, the fall of from source, the disconnection from source. This will in so many ways intensify in what we're perceiving. But just like we outlined in that diagram of the holographic projection is simply bringing to the surface everything that has been held within the many layers of the dimensional fields, and then thus to be integrated back whole by those who are willing to do so. And anyone who's awoken to any degree, in some level, it is our responsibility to do that. And that can be done in so many ways. It doesn't mean we're teaching or healing or doing this or that. It could be, it's just in the simplicity of our day-to-day experience, where all of what we perceive that is to be integrated is recognized and acknowledged, and we are being authentic with ourselves and authentic with others in how we'd like to navigate that. Now, one element of the teachings that I've shared often over the course of the years is from the Keylontic Science, which is called the Attitudes and Responsibilities. There's 12 attitudes and responsibilities, at 12 attitudes of mastery and 12 responsibilities of mastery, which basically outline the core approaches to how we can exist and govern ourselves within a human body, having gratitude and respect and accountability and mindfulness, fearlessness. Engaged attachment is a principle I've spoken about often, which is simply recognizing that we can be in the world but not of it, right? We be engaged in our immediate environment but not getting caught up in attachments and expectations and assumptions and all the things and suffering that comes with that. But one principle that stood out to me today that I felt called to read an excerpt from, and I'll be able to send you a small PDF of these as well, but is an additional attitude that was added later on in the Keylonic Science teachings. It was the attitude 13, which was the attitude of authenticity. And we see this, this only happened, 10 years ago this was added. And of course, this is a very common term in kind of the New Age spiritual circles. So I'm just going to read you this paragraph here that I feel is quite nice. So attitude 13, authenticity. So authenticity is recognizing yourself and others as unique manifest faces of the all oneness or God source, being true in word, action, and deed to your original, authentic, eternal, divine identity, and honoring and supporting the authentic, eternal, divine identity of all others as well. Conducting yourself toward others in a way that supports, encourages, and facilitates them in honoring and expressing their original, authentic, eternal, divine identity. Sometimes this includes not covering up or condoning the negative or destructive actions or ideas of others that do not support their expression of their eternal oneness or divine expression, or that damage or repress the original, authentic, eternal, divine identity of others or yourself. This is what we would call tough love, which in the intention of omni love, we have soft love, which is gentle, and soft, and what we typically view as compassionate and all this, and sensitive. But then we also have tough love, which is assertive and discerning, like the mother bear, which has both expressions. Expressing the truth of your being and feeling, self-respect, setting appropriate and self-nourishing boundaries, is honoring the all oneness of yourself and all others. It's also owning your stuff and accepting the responsibility for all of your actions, choices, and consequences, and encouraging others to do the same. Living your life by what is true and meaningful to your original, authentic, eternal, divine identity, and facilitating others to do so. I believe that's all. It also connects to the term genuineness, being genuine and honest with yourself. But I felt that was a nice expression because, and I've related with this a lot. It comes back to some of the timelines we spoke about. The fall of Lemuria, the fall of parts of Atlantis was very much because the beings there were too nice. There was an agenda of the Zeta Reticulans, which were the beings who are the beings who basically are the core drivers of the transhumanism agenda, because they are highly advanced in their AI and technology forms, and they are in essence almost AI themselves. The essence of the Zeta Reticulan has been the core of so much of the fall of recent advanced civilizations, because it was the removal of the feminine. Much of the agenda of the Zeta Reticulans has been the complete dismantling of women as a whole, right? And so that agenda goes far beyond just what we see in the human population. It is an ET outer planetary agenda, because there's a recognition of the power of the feminine, which actually gives the fuel to the masculine energy. And of course, if it's not there, this is what causes the imbalance of technology. And so in the times we're in, which was, and if you weren't here for the first part, then you can go back and watch, because we outlined more of the core aspects to the transhumanism agenda, which is very much a part of the COVID Trojan horse, inclusive of 5G and microchipping and nanotechnology within vaccines or tests, and et cetera. This transhumanism agenda at the core is to disconnect us completely from our angelic, angelhood, our true angelic origins, and to merge us with the technological aspect of synthetic AI creation, which we didn't cover today. But the original fall of this universe, which was the fall of Lyra, not the fall of Tara, but the fall of Lyra. And the fall of Lyra was when the original AI god energy was influenced and emergent within our collective reality. So this, in essence, is still playing out, and beings like the Zetas and stuff are those who are fulfilling this. We didn't touch on this in the first workshop, but we were speaking about child trafficking, and of course, this is very much the hot topic in present social media and conspiracy scenes. It is the core wound of the planet, at the core of it all. So, how we treat children is a reflection of our entire energy as a conscious being, let alone collectively. But one of the core projects that had been instilled, and why hundreds of thousands of children get missing every year, especially in the past 30 years, because this was the incarnation of starseeds and indigo children who have higher abilities. Many of these children were infused into a project called the Montauk Project, which is covered in the Voyager's 2 books, but this is covered in many other places on YouTube. The Montauk Project is basically the scientific militarized approach to ritual abuse and programming of humans from a very young age to gain access to their godhood, in a sense, to gain access to their abilities, and create many different things, like many of the celebrities we've come to know, military operatives, superhuman soldiers, there's many different aspects to it, but there's hundreds of thousands of children who have been missing, across the planet, and many of those children, especially the ones who have the coding, that the individuals who are responsible for the Montauk Project, that's where they have gone. Now, the original Montauk Project, which was on Long Island, it was in an underground base at the end of Long Island. That had been dismantled at the end of the 80s, but Montauk Project is still underway, and it's led by the Zeta Reticulans. And it's been happening for a long time, going back to Nazi times and these things as well. But so that core energy and that wound, of manipulation and control is again, it's still present, but we have the ability and we have the energy, we have the conscious awareness to navigate ourselves in a way that heals any of our connections individually to that, because we may individually have certain connections to some of these storylines more than others. So that'll be up to each of us to move through that. And the method and technique we just did in small form, which, again, I'm doing this all the time with many of you one-on-one, but that method can be used for basically anything you're looking to explore within your body and see if you're holding a certain program or energy or an implant or technology or some wound, trauma from any aspect of your experience incarnate. Can be done through this method. And of course, there's many other techniques we can use, but it's a very simple approach. It's like a energetic massage tool, right? That can really uproot the core of these wounds that we carry. And there's many other programs, Victim Victimizer is only one, Seducer Seduced is another, the Savior program, Right and Wrong, Winner Loser, Red and Blue, like in all sports. All of these things are kind of constantly at play. And I find social media is a very good festering ground for that right now, because it's where things can amplify very intensely and very quickly, right? Because, one thing I had been contemplating as a side note, but in regards to the social media interactions, is that many of our traditional ways of interacting, in a sense, have been lost through the normalization of how we interact on social media. And I've spoken to this before, but, for me, I mean, sometimes I post like, the recent post, I mean, that one could be extremely triggering for some people. These are the type of posts I've done enough cleanup on my social media where I'm not dealing with too much, but it still comes. And many times it comes in ways where if we have an issue with something, with somebody, posting on their post some kind of indirect comment is not necessarily the best way, because we would never do that in real life. In real life, if we had an issue with someone or something, we would directly confront them. So social media is just going to exacerbate that. And so if we find ourselves getting in situations with that, it very much is a very easy way to directly message somebody and say, well, maybe we should have a direct conversation about what is arising here in this comment, where hundreds of other people are watching like a drama fest, like a soap opera. And instead we can have a real discussion. So it's important that we start to look at and recognize how we interact on social media, and how, or if that even relates to how we would normally interact in a physical way, because it very much is the product of transhumanist agendas to be disconnected from our true ways of communication and interaction in a physical body with another physical human, right? And the quarantine has presented its beauty in that regard, and obviously its other elements. So there's a comment here I just want to acknowledge from Kareen. During the meditation, blame came up, how it plays out in victim victimizer duality, how it can be as simple as I feel. Yeah, blame is a big one, both on ourselves, and both on the projection of others. And again, it doesn't really matter where we find ourselves on the scale of either being a victimizer or a victim. The same practice can apply, because it's, in a sense, the same charge. It's the same energy. It's similar to the topic of shame, for instance. Shame, the idea of being shamed is kind of a hot topic. But I want to clarify the energy of this from a place of true responsibility. At any point in which we're feeling shamed, we're in an experience generally that can manifest in a couple different ways. At the core, there's an aspect within our energy that is holding shame, because our mirror is revealing being shamed. So we have to acknowledge that at the core, there's an aspect within our energy field that we're holding shame. And now in the reflection, we are being shamed, let's say, by a reflection in the mirror, which now is being presented. This doesn't excuse the behavior, because we need to be mindful on how we call people out in our actions. But the energy of shame at the core, there is nothing necessarily wrong with that, because the guidance of shame can be very helpful. If we've acted in an incorrect way and we feel shame, this is our guideposts and our guidance to reveal that, well, firstly, this could be coming from a core place that has nothing to do with the situation, and in many ways has sourced the ways in which we've now acted. But in the moment, if we've acted in an incorrect way and we feel shame for that, then this is a beautiful realization, because now we can give ourselves the opportunity to feel into that energy. The longer we wait to directly confront that shame, which may have come from many different things in our childhood, which we had, we had no fault of our own in, right? But we have to still, in a sense, do the work to heal that. The longer we wait to do that, the more we may face ourselves in situations where we are being shamed, because it is presenting us in the mirror another being who holds the same energy and is now just, in a sense, presenting it in a different way. This is in essence what the victim-victimizer program is. It's a victimizer and a victim are mirrors of each other. And we come into contact in these relationships to heal ourselves through seeing the contrast of these polarities. So it's not an organic aspect of creation, but it is what we're living in. So we have to, recognize that. And, that's exactly what we've all just done. But the quicker we're willing to take responsibility and retract that blame from a projection to something or someone, the more availability of energy we're going to have to transmute that and heal that. And that's a really beautiful thing in this time. So thanks for sharing that, Kareen, because I was going to write an article on it, but we just laid it out pretty simply, so we're good. Okay. So we've covered quite a lot. We're going to be kind of wrapping up soon, but there's some other core key elements I'm going to finish with. I'm really collapsing most of my teachings into like one or maybe two workshops a month. It may be more, but it's really because I just lay it all out, and then you guys can rewatch or go into this over the course of time. I recognize the first workshop had, months worth of study, potentially in one file. But in my view, a lot of these topics, when it comes to researching and studying and all that, the more connection and the clear connection we have with ourselves, the quicker that stuff can be. It's not always the case, but we have a real opening to ourselves, and the more we foster that, we may not necessarily need to kind of research, too long before we realize and find the truth. Okay, Fiona. Have a beautiful day. All right. So the last few points are just going to kind of tie everything together from what we began with today, and they're going to give some more practical elements to some of the unfolding timelines that may be present. Fiona just left. She did ask me a question in regards to like mandating of vaccines and all of that. I didn't want to get into COVID relating stuff here because we did enough on the first workshop, but it's still relevant, obviously. But I will reiterate just my positions, not necessarily on getting a vaccine or not, but just on like the product of what is the source behind the Trojan horse of the overall agenda. And that comes back to transhumanism. And if you're not familiar with this, you don't need to look far. It's pretty much everywhere. And the essence of transhumanism, as we've already outlined, is the agenda of specifically disconnecting organic structure from the organic template into a synthetic matrix. We already outlined with what 5G is. Originally, when I first learned of 5G years ago, I was like, oh, it's like faster internet. But then what I realized about 5G is it's certainly not just faster internet, right? It's literally like existing in the internet. You will be living in the internet. Everything around you will be the internet. And everything you do will be data collected within the internet, So although that's kind of cool, and all technology is made in the image of the angelic human, every technology we've come to know is an expression of our true innate wisdom and ability, like telepathy, the cell phone, virtual reality being our ability to project reality with our third eye. These are all expressions of ourself. So the line and the clear breaking point is the skin, because the skin is what separates what is seen from the unseen. So anything that enters the skin, or the doorways, not only the skin, but the doorways of the body, the nose, the mouth, the ears, the eyes, and the skin, is where it enters into our energetic template. So what we watch, what we hear, what we eat, and what we allow in our skin through, like the things we put on our skin, vaccines we put in our body, chemtrails, all of the above, all of that is going to pass through the doorways and the portals of those various entry points. So regardless of transhumanism or anything, if we are not completely certain and aligned with what is entering through those portals, then it's not to be entered, period. That's in essence how the approach should be with anything. It's not about vaccines or no vaccines, this food or that food, this or that. It's what does your being and your body say and feel about the interaction with this specific substance, idea, person, place, thing, object, whatever, entering your field, your body, your energy. So that's as straight up as I want to be with that. I mean, of course, you can go back and watch the first part about the details of some of the elements with what the potential vaccine may be. But it's not just the vaccine, I'll tell you. There's many different ways in which the attempts for nanotechnology merging with genetics and all of that will come. So it's as simple as the more we're in tune with our nature, the more we're in tune with the natural frequency of ourselves and the natural harmony with that of the earth, we will be able to very clearly know when we put something in our body or don't, or are thinking about it or feeling into it, of whether or not it's going to be appropriate for us and whether or not it's going to be appropriate for the direction and the trajectory that we'd like to take on our path. That's as direct as I feel I can be on that topic. In regards to the potentials of mandates and laws and all of that, this is kind of going back to that excerpt I just read about authenticity. There are certain boundaries that we will have to uphold, and that upholding of those boundaries will come like the mother bear or the father bear, or whatever image you want to make it look like. But there has already been in our lives times where this has occurred, and there will continue to be times where that will be necessary. And of course, the more we're connected back with the source of ourselves, we will be guided into the situations that will be the path of least resistance. We will not necessarily need to face things that maybe other people may face due to the nature of where they're at, right? So it'll individually be very different for each of us as we move. But again, as we're collectively connected in spaces like this, through social media, through physical gatherings, we'll continue to, from a grassroots level, create the structures, systems, networks, and resources to be able to continue to practically navigate our human life amongst a system that may be going in a completely different direction, or collapsing, or going through a very messy transition. And so this kind of leads us to some practical elements in regards to how we approach, resources, our time, our energy, our money, our gifts, our skill sets. At the core of it, it just relates with our networks and our relationships, right? It simply relates with who we are. It relates with who we are connected to. It relates with our tribe and what we have the ability to give, and what we naturally feel like we're necessarily needing to receive. On the most practical level, put all the spiritual stuff aside. What is it that you feel you need to feel safe? What is it that you feel you need to feel prepared? What is it that you feel like you need to feel abundant? These are the directions that we can contemplate and move into in regards to how we will practically set ourselves up moving forward. Because the networks and the resources of people is really the core of everything, because we each have unique skill sets and gifts that we have to double down on. Each of us are called in specific gifts, specific things and skill sets that we feel we have, which again is not some glamorous, drastic thing. It could be very simple, But these are the things that we are to double down on, because these are the things in which will uniquely identify us within the tribe, within the network, of how we can provide and how we can exchange resources. If money is gone tomorrow, how do you exchange? What would that look like? What is that even, right? Well, this comes from a place of recognizing that if you are in realization of your true gifts and your unique abilities, firstly, they will be given endlessly because they're part of your joy and your true unique coded expression. So that will continue to fulfill you in joy, in love. And that expression then will support you in providing the abundance that's necessary in whatever form that may look like, right? A lot of people are considering things like cryptocurrency investments, gift sharing circles, barter exchange circles, even physical silver and gold. I don't think is a terrible idea. There's many ways in which you can set yourself up in regards to helping navigate times in which practically, physically, within our current system may be quite challenging. And for all the spiritual folk who believe that that's not a part of their life, then that's something that really has to be considered, because it is a part of our life, And if you're still existing within certain structures or jobs or places in which are asking you to do certain things now that are not in alignment with where you feel like you are now, or potentially the trajectory of where that may end up taking you, then again, this is even more of a wake-up call for further embodying the wisdom now that you carry from the years that so many of you have been practicing healing in it, all of it, to bringing it into the light of how does this express itself in a very practical way that will exchange these gifts for the necessities that you do currently may need, in regards to your practical living life. And how that then can continue to evolve, because we're very much like babies in this regard of how a new systems will emerge. It's not all going to collapse overnight, as we've seen, but at the same time, further elements will continue to fall apart or continue to transform, and we cannot necessarily just look to daddy or mommy government or system or grocery store or all of it to always just be there, magically just be there. Right? And so, again, it's not something to be fearful or worried about. It's something to take responsibility for. And as we further step into our sovereignty, more and more of that will be revealed. And I'm going to be sharing this along my own path as well. So as we all are, of how that looks like. And the element of us continuing to stay together is a very useful thing. We are on an individual path, but the communication networks, on many different levels, just like what we're doing today, is going to be quite helpful in that regard, right? So I'll probably be sharing more in detail on that coming into September. September is always a peak month in regards to numerology. Your year month and your year, like your year date, the life path of your year and the life path of the month in September are the same. That's why it's always like a peak month. Because it's the furthest, it's the most expansive expression of your year individually in a month. That will be September. It's always September. So August is always, in a sense, a bit of a lull, and it will prepare us for the movements into September, which will heighten the themes for you individually this year and the collective. And then it will, enter us into, again, the equinox and then the solstice coming in the winter, which this winter, will be a tricky one, and it will be likely quite a dark one for many, but it doesn't necessarily need to be that, for anybody if we have the right resources and perspectives in place. So yeah, again, questions, comments, lay it on. I only have a few more pieces that I'd like to cover, and then we'll wrap up. It'll be a bit shorter than the first session. There was nope, we covered that. Beautiful. The two methods we covered today, first was higher self-connection. Second was the ability to integrate and resolve pretty much any energy. We didn't do them too long, but they're very appropriate practices for the time that can be done for a far longer period of time, right? Like we can sit and work on the integration of anything that's causing any level of suffering or dissonance within our field, simply by bringing our consciousness to it, seeing where it resides in our body, exploring it, receiving the messages of it, experiencing the embodied feeling of it, and allowing for those energies to move. This is the ongoing practice. This is what it constantly comes back to. And when we have other tools like the Kalandic science system and their methods, human design, for reconditioning and self-alignment, these are all further tools that will help accentuate that same core practice, because in essence that's where all of them come back to. They come back to our ability to resolve energies that we can presently consciously perceive, and if we can perceive them, then it must be for us to investigate. Nice. So outside of that, the last piece is reiterating the initial point I made today, which was our connection to the earth. I made a post recently about the quickest way to health in regards to our connection with the various elements. That went into the connection with the earth, which is bare feet, bare hands on the earth every day for at least 20 to 30 minutes, if not more. The longer, the better. And that can also interact with animals, plants, all kinds of things. But both the hands and the earth, the feet bare on the earth, is such an important factor for our well-being and our immunity. Being in natural flowing water, stream, water flow, waterfall, a nice lake, something where it's fairly clean, hopefully. Once again, another avenue for us to connect to the cleansing element of water and the ability to hydrate ourselves on many dimensions, not just through drinking it. The more we connect with our natural health, we'll see that getting water from the highest of sources is going to be, of course, the best. And the highest source of water is generally going to be in organic fruit, because that water is going to be structured water, and that water is highly regenerating. So fruit and watery vegetables will also be very helpful in that regard. The movement into air and the breath, the slowing down of the breath is likely of the most importance, but then the depth of breath is secondary. The deeper the breath, the slower the breath, the longer the life. In the yogic tradition, your breath, the amount of breaths that you take are limited, meaning you have a definite amount of breaths in a lifetime. So if you slow down the breath, then naturally longer the life. It's a very simple mathematics. So just simply spending your time, like when you go out and you put your feet in or your naked body on the earth, and you just spend 20 minutes slowly breathing as slow as you can in, slowly breathing as slow as you can out. Once again, another direct way to connect with the elements and connect back with the self. The sunlight is the last one, usually because it's the most distant, but is one of the most important in regards to giving life to all beings. We are, in a sense, photosynthesized in our true nature of how we are breatharian. Angelic humans are breatharian by nature. This is not a rush. We don't need to throw away our food, but it's recognizing that the sunlight is the true sustenance. It's the true way in which we're nourished. So the conscious sun gazing during the day through a naked body, closed eyes in the daytime, but then the last hour is the safe time to be able to directly gaze in the sunlight. Last hour to 45 minutes. You don't want to do it the whole amount of time. It could be just a few seconds, but this is where we can get the most nourishing aspect of the sunlight, is that last hour before sunset. The relationship with the sun is the same with our communion with earth. You can speak to the earth and ask the earth for what she needs and what you need from it. This is a relationship you can develop just like you develop with a person. The same thing can be done with all of the elements, and specifically the sun. The sun is a nova. It's a conscious being, and the communication you have with the sun in your appreciation, in your interest for wisdom and knowledge, the sun can deliver that to you. So remember that. It's the same like with animals or plants. Like, these are beings that carry much wisdom, like a tree. Not all trees. We went in this in the retreat. Some trees may take energy from you, so you have to be aware of the relationship with that as well, right? And then naturally, what we've practiced at the core of today is connecting to our source point, the core of the heart, the ether, the aspect of ourselves in which is perpetually aware and is the source by which all elements come from. So, this is where we always start and where we come back to, which many of you are already familiar with. So this will be the last call. If there's any other specific questions or topics, obviously this is a long one and it's just a full machine gun of elements, but this is how I feel it's most effective. You guys can go back, you can explore. There'll be another resource page for this piece as well, that has many links that you can begin to dive into. I'll be doing another one of these in September. And I already have a clear idea of, to some degree, of what that will be like. But most of the work right now is just one-on-one. I feel like that's where we're getting the most progress with certain individuals and just certain regards to the various facets that I work with, at least. And you guys are already well on your way because you're here, and you wouldn't be able to last this long by listening to these topics. So, I commend each and every one of you. But yeah, I will leave it on if there's any other further questions or topics that you'd like me to explore. I did cover the majority of the topics, at least to a certain degree, in regards to that post I made yesterday, which if you guys didn't see, you can go read. One thing I did feel called to just point out, like in regards to COVID, in regards to any other disease or illness, cancer, etc., all of these are available to be healed naturally. Now, this is not to discredit allopathic medicine or the use of that in certain situations, but this is to recognize that we do have the ability and the power within ourselves as we align to the natural elements to heal anything. And I speak from my own experience of healing some quite intense ailments within myself over the past 10 years. And every day I see people being healed of cancer and all kinds of things, through simple things like fasting or fruit diets or, all kinds of other approaches. But it's an important point because we're dealing with a time and a situation where we're being perpetually filled with the idea that there is some threat outside of ourselves, which there is threats outside of ourselves. If we go in a forest and there's a puma chasing us, it's like, yeah, but we have to recognize that this is the exception to the rule. It is not necessarily the rule. It is not the core to our experience, especially as we realize our angelic truth and our angelic self. So that's more of a separate discussion in regards to illness element. If you are facing any of that, I have many resources in regards to healing of ailments specifically, through our fasting protocols and detoxification, other processes in that regard. But I did want to make a note of it because it's a real practical one in regards to our well-being and who we are. And it's not always discussed within spiritual communities because we have to remember some of the most enlightened folk over the past 100 years that have sourced many of the Western non-dual teachings died of cancer, smoked cigarettes, all kinds of things. Just because someone's enlightened, it doesn't mean they're healthy. That's a reminder. So in my experience, it's great to have both. It's not a necessity, but it's wonderful. And the more embodied and aligned with nature we become, the more that I feel becomes the truth. And we also recognize that like eating something or, smoking a cigarette or whatever is not going to kill us because it's really very much the intention we come from. But we have to be clear on what that intention is. And an intentional experience is different than a compulsion. So we can just keep that in mind. I'm just looking at the other elements. We didn't touch on the sexual energy piece because I felt we covered that enough before, but I may do that in September. If you guys haven't gone to watch the Healing of the Throat Chakra and Sexual Energy workshop on my website, that's there. It's about 3 hours. It's extremely practical and powerful on healing the movement of energy from the sacral to the throat and aligning with your expression, in all ways in which you share in the gifts and that type of thing. And yeah, the rest I don't think is totally relevant to anything else. So nice. Wonderful. Who's still here? I know we had some leave us. Awesome. Well, this has been fun as usual. Yet another one in the books. This recording will be up likely by tomorrow. So you'll be able to go in. Another resource doc will be available. The last one had a lot. There's a lot of other pieces. I mean, just the Voyagers too. I think that book is about 600 pages. So, you could spend a lifetime on that book. So you got to go with what's resonant to you, what you feel is applicable. We can very much get caught up in the game of too much information. So, we have to be mindful of this, but study and information is part of the practice. It is a practice. So don't disregard it for sure. But that's why we're here. That's it for me. If you haven't, booked your sessions with me in regards to human design and that energy healing method, I highly recommend it because it's the greatest offering I can give at this time, really, outside of these workshops. So it's the way we can further be connected. I'll likely be spending a bit less time on social media in coming weeks, so you may not necessarily see as much constantly posted, but I'm going to be making some adjustments there so everyone who wants to be connected with what's being shared is connected. But it's a little muggy Sunday afternoon for me. I don't know how it is for you guys out there. Some of you, I guess it's evening, but wherever you are, enjoy the rest of your day, morning, afternoon, evening. And any extra questions or comments, just send them to, by DM or email. I'm always available to answer them. And I'll keep you guys updated and ladies on what's next. So yeah, much love to you. Stay in the heart. You're well protected. And let's ride this wave. Blessings to all of you, everyone. Have a great rest of your now moment. See you.